I think Doom should get DPS Doom in 6v6. I have an idea. Let's just start with like, let's see where they go next, and then we can start to theorize that stuff. Because I don't know, maybe not. Like, okay, here's the thing, okay? Because like you asked that question. Now, but now before we go to the next part, why did they move Doomfist to a tank role? Well, like what was their general reasoning? Like I know why, but I'm like asking like chat, like what was the reason why they did that? Because this is like a two-step question or like process to what you're about to ask or say. You said too much damage? No, that wasn't the case. And that was the person who initially asked the question. So that wasn't the case. The reason why I got moved is because they wanted to really take away a lot of the CC from the DPS. And when you have a hero like Doomfist who's based off of CC, right? Like Doomfist's whole kit is legitimately CC. Crowd control, stunts, all of that. So the problem is that would they put Doomfist back to like a DPS in 6v6? It depends what their philosophy on CC is again, right? Say they did go back to 6v6, which we don't even know if they are, right? This is just all like assumed stuff. Let's say they did, and they went back to 6v6. What's their take on stunts? Because if they want to bring back a bunch of CC again, then yes, you can maybe move Doom back into that category. But if they want to go into the world, which I think in 6v6, less CC the better, because CC was a huge problem in Overwatch 1, then you would probably keep Doomfist in the tank role, right? Because like at that point you would just need a whole like kit redesign. You know what I mean? For Doomfist to like really become like a DPS again, because like how do you make a game where they want less CC and then put Doomfist back in there and then you don't have that CC again? And that's why they did that, because like Doomfist, got rolled. Now, there's more they could do there. Maybe they get rid of CC. There's different engagement points, like different ways that they do that. But like that is why I'm saying like we need to kind of like go at a one-by-one like discussion on that and like see what they do first before we go to the next stuff. And I know it's not like the best answer for that, but I think it's like a better way to kind of like look at it and approach it first. It depends what their philosophy is going to be. I'll read this right now. Not a hot topic. We kind of feel like the past months they've been releasing really expensive stuff and not a gap between the releases, such as the Overwatch Battle Pass stuff and then Transformers Bundle and the Rhine Weapon and now Lifeguard Bundle. I can give a little small thought on that because I'm going to actually do a video in the future more talking about that. But like, I think there definitely becomes an issue where your only like selling point to a season becomes cosmetics. And I feel like we've seen more of that recently. So like when they release more stuff in the shop, it also stings a bit more too, because like if they aren't giving you a bunch of stuff to do in the game and the only thing that's really the selling point of a new patch, a new thing is a bundle, it feels even worse, right? And I think like that's why they need to just, I've talked about it a lot, where they need to really come back with more stuff, more polarizing stuff. And they talked about it and alluded to it in the interview a little bit more, where they need to come back with more stuff because otherwise those hit even harder, right? So that's on them to come up with more polarizing stuff when they also come out with their bundles and events, because if your event is purely a event that says, hey, you just buy this and there's nothing else to go with it or like any more substance outside of like maybe a couple balance changes, like it's going to be even more frustrating to begin with. So anyway, I hope I'm making like points there. So yeah, I'm really curious. So I also get frustrated with hero hitboxes being significantly bigger than the player model. I could just be terrible, but I find dying to stuff that visually misses me by a significant margin to be the single most frustrating thing to do. I can understand. Okay, so Corborg, I can understand the frustration of that. I will say I'm a little bit more towards the side of I'm okay. I like the changes because I think that it just made a game that was getting difficult for people to be a bit more accessible and do it. And while it's frustrating at times, I don't think like that's the number one issue as to why like you might lose a game. Like if it was the reason why you always lost the game, I can understand like, okay, this needs to be fixed. But I think it's more like understanding that it's a game that's been out for 8 years, and it just opens the door for more people to enjoy the game, and that's probably why. Obviously, lessen the skill gap depending on how you play the game, especially if you play it like competitively, things like that. I can understand that, but like from the overall player base, basically it's fun to watch yourself hit shots. It's not as fun to go 2-12. But I understand the frustration, and like you're valid to have that frustration. So at the same time, that's what people liked in Overwatch 1, where the only point to new events were the skins. Yeah, but that's because it was free, right? So that's a little bit different, yeah. So like I said, like there's definitely, they also have done a little bit recently where you don't get like a free skin sometimes. Like I think they did in a recent event where you didn't get a free skin. I think, okay, wait, was it the Transformers one where it was a bit like their response was like, oh, we wanted players to like be excited about going to grind something. There should have been, in my opinion, during that collab, they probably should have had a free skin to go with. Because I think there was many more options of Transformers characters as well as heroes in Overwatch that could have benefited from like a free skin that people would have liked. And then that becomes a problem too. I also think, and this is what they haven't talked about yet, there's clearly like a pipeline. Is that how a pipeline issue happening? Because like normally you'd have like this like pipeline where things are coming back to you. But once again, let's go back to Venture. How many skins got released for Venture Chat. So clearly there's something happening there that they need to get like back on track. And that's why you're seeing that. Because there was like no skins for Venture. There was one ice cream shop skin and one on a drop, and that was it. And that took a while on release. So there's clearly something there, right? So, and I'm reading on what you're saying, Chad. I guess this is just random Q&A mode now. I guess I'm doing like another interview here. You know, just I'm doing my own. Did Overwatch 2 finally deal with the cheating in the game? I think it's gotten better. I mean, but like they don't ever talk about that. They're not gonna like post about it. That's just like a back and forth like cat and mouse game that like they can't really tell you that they've made it like changes to that. You just like you'll probably hear about it like if people are telling you they're getting banned and stuff like that. It seems to be getting better. What would you have wanted to ask the devs regarding 6v6? I don't know. I think I would have probably asked different things. Like I would have talked more about like if I had to ask questions, I would have brought up more about like how they need to do more polarizing stuff and that they can't like sit back on the game like and just like Season 9 was a great example of that. The launch of Overwatch 2 was a great example of that. People want an excuse to play Overwatch, but you have to give them a reason to play Overwatch. And like balance patches, and they alluded to this at the beginning of the thing, don't move that bar too much, right? Like the real hardcore player base will like that, but like a lot of players don't really care as much about that. They just want to play the game and want to have a reason to play the game, but you need to give reasons to play the game, right? And sometimes that like if you just rely purely on cosmetics to like sell your season, or you don't do polarizing changes like Season 9, you run into those issues consistently. So yeah, I definitely think the cheater thing has picked up a little bit. So you think 5v5 is fine? They just botched on a release and didn't change everything with balance until the game already was many seasons into release. I mean, there's been a lot of issues. Like chat, like here, you want to talk about something? I think there's been like I think the problem that was ran into over the past almost 2 years of Overwatch 2 when it comes to like the 5v5 side of things is that it's always addressing like the wrong problems. Like remember when okay, and actually it's funny because I don't know if SVB is still here, but remember when like they kind of went on like that huge rant about like how counter swapping happens because when you switch you get more L charge? Let me ask you, chat. My take on that was that isn't the case at all. You could leave it at 20%, it would have been fine. 100%. There was zero, at no point was that going to be the issue. Let me ask you a question, chat. Now that they've made it 15% out of nowhere because there was just a random discussion about that a year and a half ago, has that changed anything for counter swapping? Nope. Had nothing to do with it. Had nothing to do with it at all. And that's what I was saying too. I'm like, dude, I'm like, listen, that ain't the case here. Like, it has nothing to do with counter swapping. People are not counter swapping because you get an extra 5% ult charge at all. It doesn't do anything. I will counter swap at 80% if it means you can swap at 80% and it will give you value. And then we've seen that. People will counter swap no matter what. The ult charge never was a problem with that. It never was a problem. It actually gave players a bit more willingness to switch on other roles, never mind tank roles. That was never going to be the problem. But my point is, things like that became the focus early on, and that's what the problem was. Now, obviously, 2 years later, we've realized there's more of an issue there. I actually like the idea of, I will say, even though like there's going to be some hot takes on it, but I feel like the pickable passives made me realize that a pickable passives for like each hero individually could help a lot. Because when I played Wrecking Ball, and I saw some people meme it, but like I was able to play Wrecking Ball against a Sombra way easier and like just much better, just having even 20% less cooldowns, be able to do that, right? You know what I'm saying? Oh, you should ult charge to carry over from match to match? I agree, that's a good one. What are the root causes of what heroes the enemies plays is more important than what your own team plays, right? And tank synergy is where it reels it back to focus on what your team plays more. Yeah, I mean, I think Flats actually brought up a really valid point with this, where like, when counter swapping happens, it's also a team thing, right? So like on paper, let's just do this on paper. If on paper, like your DPS and supports always wanted to swap, like it would alleviate some of the problems because like the counter swap issue is, yeah, I forgot what I was talking about. I got nothing. I just turned 34, so I get to use that as an excuse now. I got nothing, I don't know. We were talking about something. With counter swapping, the tank is expected to counter swap, right? The tank is expected to counter swap. But what really makes the counter swap a problem is the other team also counter swaps. So if the other team's DPS and support make swaps, but yeah, I think like, so like when players don't want to swap, like you'll hear all the time, like your teammates get mad at you for not counter swapping, right? And then if you do counter swap and you need them to counter swap for you, they won't counter swap. Do you see the problem? So like it becomes also like a playstyle issue where players want only the tank to be a part of the counter swap thing, and then like they won't make any swaps, but you're the one expected to make swaps. And that's why it gets stuck. You could probably stop half of the counter swaps by just like doing a couple DPS and support swaps, and then you can just you can stop a counter swap. Like you can stop a counter swap right then and there, right? Absolutely. You could stop it right there, but players don't want to do that. Players want their tank to swap, and that's it. But even then, that wouldn't alleviate the problem of what tanking runs into. So, yeah. Do I think we get more team comp swaps in 6v6 and 5v5? I don't know. I'm gonna be honest with you. I've been more well versed in how like every rank plays in Overwatch 2 than Overwatch 1. I'll be honest with you, I didn't pay attention to like how like gold played, for example, in Overwatch 1, right? So like because I wasn't quite aware of how people played in Overwatch 1 and gold, I don't know. It could be the same thing. You might get the same amount of team comp swaps. I think Aaron actually alluded to it. He said that every game you see on average one swap from a tank, one swap from a DPS, and then half a swap from a support. So like, I don't know. Maybe. Don't I think 6v6 will bring back the ult stacking instead of individual plays? I have no idea. Dude, I'm gonna be real with you. Who knows? I'm gonna teach you something here, Chad. Okay? I'm gonna give you a secret on a couple things. You ready? No matter what the mode is, whether it's 5v5, 6v6, I won't even bring up 7v7 because that's just a joke. Okay? There's gonna be issues. And there'll always be those type of issues, which once again goes to why they're like when they do stuff, it also needs to be super polarizing and like they need to make more major changes because like you're always gonna run into those issues, especially 8 years into a game. I've seen it in 6v6. I've seen it in 5v5. You're going to have your issues. Now, counter argument to people will make is like, oh, well, they didn't like balance as much in like 6v6. Actually, some of the argument you can make is that because they didn't make many changes for a long time, people started to solve things more. So that made the meta more kind of like locked in place. Does that make sense? So because they weren't adding new heroes and weren't making any like major changes, the game kind of fell into a balance, right? But what happened? Even though the game was probably at one of its most balanced states, people were bored. They just wanted something to change. Do you see how balance is? Where like you can't, perfect balance won't happen. And when we've seen Overwatch at its most balanced, people were like bored out of their mind because they just like they wanted something new because there wasn't anything happening. So that like is kind of, I wasn't bored by the way, but you could see like as the player numbers dropped when you were having no new content and all this other stuff happening, like players were just like I just did nothing new, right? So. It could go well. Maybe it does solve issues. Maybe it doesn't. I think there'll always be those things. That's why I still think that like they need to be more aggressive with how they do things. Season 9 is a good way to explain it, and once again, the launch of Overwatch 2. Because like people want an excuse to play Overwatch. You just need to give them that reason. I'm curious, but I do hear a lot that tanks suck from a lot of Overwatch streamers and such. Is it every single tank in the game that isn't fun to play to you guys, or is there some outliers that exist that don't have that problem? Like, let me throw something at the dartboard here. Diva, for example. Tanks don't suck. The feeling of playing a tank sucks. You see the difference there? Like, I can't sit here and BS you and say that tanks suck right now. I think tanks are in a good spot. Or not a good spot. Let me rephrase that. Sorry. Good spot. This is once again why I want to have a script. Tanks are in a spot where they're strong. They can make a lot of plays, but it's the feeling of playing tank that is the problem. And that's where players run into the issue. Now, some people might tell you, no, tank sucks, this sucks, buff this, buff that. I don't think tanks need buff right now. I think it's more along the lines of how it feels to play tank. And, like, players just don't... Like, when you sign up to play a tank, you're signing up to be a punching bag, right? And some people want to do that, some people don't. That's why some heroes that are less about a punching bag, like an example of that is like Queen. Queen feels really fun to people and is a hero that you don't hear people say they want nerfed all the time because Queen is a hero that is fun to play against. An example of a hero that is not fun to play against is Roadhog, right? But circling back to Roadhog here, and keep in mind, any Roadhog mains, this isn't me going the flats level of get rid of Hog, delete Hog. It's more along the lines of like, we had Roadhog be one of the mainstay tanks for a long time in ranked, as well as Orisa and Mauga. Of course, people are not going to like playing against that as a tank. Like when you can't play those fun heroes. So like, there's a lot there that I think they're getting better at, and I think Alec alluded to that a little bit, where like a lot of people are new to the team, and I think that's something that like I don't know if this is like, let me think of a good way to explain this. I think like you have to remember this is also an Overwatch team that's had so much overhaul over the past few years that it feels like just now they're finally starting to settle a little bit. Like you're starting to see some of the same people there. You're starting to see like the same people working on stuff. And like when you do that, you can make a better game because you don't have so many different things happening, right? Back in Overwatch 1 towards the end of it and when they were making Overwatch 2, I was hearing like, I remember like, and I'm not going to like, I won't like say any like, I remember talking to somebody that was doing there and they're like, yeah, they put me on the WoW team now. It's like, why are people on the Overwatch team getting put on the WoW team to work on something randomly, right? There's probably way less of that happening now, so like there's also opportunity for them to be able to do a lot of things they want to do now because there's more consistency to what they're doing. Granted, that's a wait and see, because in the gaming industry, as you've seen recently with like Bungie and like Intel now, Sometimes it's results driven, and like sometimes they can't give you the results if they're not getting the same back end or the same consistency, but then like, it's like, how do you win there? So that's a whole different discussion that we'll get into some another point. So you said to make tanks better, they need survivability, movement, CCD reduction. I mean, there's a whole different things there. I think that's why I think, like, I don't know if this is what will happen with Overwatch, but I think the future of Overwatch falls into that pickable passives one day. I really do. Not pickable passives like for each role, I think for each hero, which is obviously a large undertaking. But we also don't know how much stuff they have from PvE, which is actually interesting because, like, you have to remember, and obviously, like, the PvE can be a sore subject still, but, like, they have a lot of stuff from their PvE that they probably can apply already passive-wise that, like, could make it easier to, like, kind of plug and play some things, right? We don't know what they have on the back end for that type of stuff, but there's probably a lot of stuff in there that they have from PvE they can reuse and be able to bring some of that back into the game. So, yep. You said also 6v6 sucked. I'm going to disagree in one sense here. I think both were fine. I think I've enjoyed 6v6. I've enjoyed 5v5. I don't think it sucked. I think it's more about how the game feels at the time. Keep in mind, like, at the same time, I talk about with, like, rivals, like, people always, like, reference, like, 2016 Overwatch as, like, the best time that they played Overwatch, which I can agree. I mean, I loved playing it then. It was also the most imbalanced that you've ever seen Overwatch. It was awful balance at the beginning of Overwatch 1. Terrible. But you know what? At the beginning of a game, no one cares about that stuff because it's just about, like, having fun, learning heroes, learning how to play something, you know what I mean? So, like, there's a lot of different stuff that can happen there that, like, I think players will, you know, that can become an issue, so. You said pickle passive actually made tank pretty fun. No, you can see it. I could play Wrecking Ball and Doomfist in quick play again because you know what happens in quick play? The DPS player loads in and they go, do they have a tank? If so, I'm going Sombra. And they would go Sombra every time I went Wrecking Ball and Doomfist, but I could play the hero finally. Yeah, exactly. New and fun. Exactly. That's why I still think sometimes, like, oh, bless you. I think Overwatch needs to go with, like, a more polarized and, like, approach to things sometimes. Easier said than done, right? Like, you can't always do a season 9, but you can't. I think they need to do less filler seasons. I think right now they've hit filler season level again. I mean, this season especially. This season they, like, rushed stuff. It was really interesting. Like, they rushed mid-season patch to get, like, to get something out, and then, like, now you're just stuck in, like, limbo waiting for season 12, which season 12 is going to be awesome, I think. You have a really simple question, and I get it if you can't remember at this point, but I was curious if you remembered how I felt when I first found out about 5v5 when Overwatch 2 was showed. Yeah, I actually can give you my thoughts on that one. I didn't care at the time because I was just excited to hear Overwatch 2 information after hearing nothing for years. I don't know if I even had, like, a true reaction to 5v5 at that point because that was the first time we heard about Overwatch 2 in years or, like, a long time. So I was more just excited that we were hearing information. That kind of, like, breezed past me at that point. Does that make sense? I wasn't worried about it. I was just happy that we finally heard something about a game because they went in the dark for years. That was it. You just like tank because 66 was forced to play tank or have long Q times? I mean, Q times are always going to be an issue. They had a question in there. They were like, oh, how do you fix the problem of, like, Q times? And it's like, the truth is, like, that's going to be, that will always be an issue with 66 unless they, like, fundamentally changed how a role is. Do you know what I'm saying? They would have to, like, fundamentally change how a role plays out. And I think that would be a bit of a problem. You know what I mean? Said fixing Q times. Just how do you fix Q times in 6v6? Unless you do, like, a hybrid flex queue that they mentioned where, like, you can swap around. So, like, you can make maybe Q DPS, but you have tank as, like, a secondary role. And then, like, there's variations there that could work maybe. Like even then, like, that's tough to say. I just don't think you said get more players, more hype. It doesn't matter because you could add 25 million more players tomorrow. It won't change the ratio. And that's why the queue times are as long as they are. That's what they were trying to explain in the blog post too. You could add 100 million players to the game tomorrow, and the ratios will end up around the same spot, meaning the queue times would fall around the same spot. Does that make sense? So unless the ratio shifted from, let's say, 15% play tank to 33% play tank, right? See what I'm saying? It wouldn't change anything. And how do you get the people to play 33% of a tank? You don't. Maybe you rename the role to, like, DPS light. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe that does something, but, like, there's just so many different variations of, like, tank is just, yeah. They've already did that, given incentive to play the tank role. Want to know how I have 457,000 coins right now? You ready? Want to know why? Because I played tank and they gave you coins and loot boxes. That's how I have that many coins. It won't change anything. Some people like you are okay with longer queue times for better games. Well, I think, like, for your style of that one, Astro Panda, I do think Aaron kind of alluded to, like, that could be a possibility in the future. Like, if you, like, and I'll once again pinpoint this in my React video, but, like, Aaron mentioned that what if there's a world where, like, they just are okay with longer queue times and you can just, like, you know, you can just put a 6v6 in the game. And now, yeah, you know what? If you love 6v6, you go play that mode, and you might have longer queue times, but, like, that's the game you want to play. And I think that's what they were kind of alluding to in that. So, he says, I don't even read anymore, I just scan. So I just read really fast. Like, I'll read this one, like, right here. So, You're never going to convince the majority of the player base that they're taking the majority of the abilities in the CC every game. So I don't know that's level because the tanks are drop, but if I can figure out a way to make it not alone every ability on the tank into the best play, but that's the only way they can fix it. And I think 66 might be the best option because at least another tank to take it away from you specifically. I jumbled a couple words, but like basically, yes, you're right in that sense, but like it's really hard to like get players to want to play tanks, right? Like, and especially with CC, etc. Like that was one of the issues. Now, is there a world where you have a 6v6 with less CC? Yes, absolutely. Like there is a role where you could have a world where like there's less CC and that becomes a problem. But like once again, that also turns into the idea of like, you know, maybe there is a world where like 6v6 feels better to players. And maybe they increase the tanks to 20%. That alleviates queue times to 4 minutes for people, right? Is 4 minutes good enough? I don't know. I mean, I also look at like a game like League, and I remember League used to have queue issues back in the day. I don't know if it's an issue anymore. Like I used to remember, I didn't really play League, but I used to put like League on and like a player would be in like a 30-minute queue watching YouTube videos, right? Now that might be at the high end, not in like the media. Like what are gold queue times, for example? Like with that chart, like what are gold queue times in 6v6? I don't know. So when people/streamers are such tanks are not fun, then the outliers and tanks where said tanks are actually fun to play, or is that just simply every single tank is not fun to play? Okay, sometimes when you don't know how to express your feeling about something, that's why I think streamers say that tanks are not fun. There's multiple layers to that. I think like I like playing tank, right? But it's the feeling of tank that frustrates a tank player. Getting CC'd constantly, getting slept, being the one that take all the focus of every cooldown that exists in the game, that's the part that feels bad to players, right? That's the part that feels bad to a solo tank, is that you take every single thing in the game, and the reward to be able to get something out of that is far less than a DPS or a support. And that's where, like, that's why tanks don't like that, and some tanks have alluded to, like, 6v6 in that one, right? So, like, that's the problem, because you had less of that and less pressure on you, so you could alleviate some of the pressure with your other tank. Now, it doesn't always work that way, because then you have the Hog Zarya matchups, you have the Hog Wrecking Ball. Then if, like, queue times get long, DPS players start queuing tank purely just to play the game, and then they just go hard feed on the role they don't play, and your games become, like, a legit hard feed. The amount of times that I was playing tank, and you'd get a DPS player who only wanted to play Zarya on Temple of Anubis and couldn't get through a choke for 5 minutes, and they just said they're there for priority passes, was unreal, right? Doesn't mean it can't work now. It's just that it was like a lot of the problems you ran into. You said Blizzard should hide queue times. That wouldn't be a good idea. What if we gave tanks a small buff that activates after receiving a CC or a rebuff? Once again, I think this is where this is why I'm on the side of why don't we do pickable passives for every hero and then see what happens. See what happens when you can alleviate the pressure on each role, give some, like, they call it player agency, I think is how they describe it, where you give the player more to think about, and then see what happens. That's where I think they should go next. Now, if they want to do a 6v6 mode too and all that, I'm fine with that. I don't think they want to give players that problem, so yeah, I can see that happening. Oh, I mean, the pickable passives quick play was, like, as bare bones as it get, by the way. I want to point that out. I'm going to point something out. That was, like, I think their pickable passives doesn't even scratch the surface of what they could do, in my opinion. I legit don't even think it scratches the surface on what they could do. It also adds more excitement to your hero. Like, I envision it like this. Let's say you're playing Dorado. Let's say you're playing Dorado and you're a Torb-only player. Well, right now you're kind of screwed, right? Well, what if, like, you load into Dorado and you have a passive that gives you it gets rid of your Molten Core, but it gives you a cooldown that gives you, like, 50 less armor or 30 less armor than a Molten Core, but it gives you mobility to go high ground. Now you have, not only does the map not dictate that, you now have a way to get high ground control on a map that you would normally struggle on, and gives you more agency over what you're doing. See, that's where I envision things like that, where, like, you could add these, like, issues and, like, problems that heroes have, and, like, you can, like, add, like, cool features. Like, you know, you load in, you're like, okay, what kind of Torb player are you? I'm an Assassin Torb, right? And maybe yeah, or I'm Spider Torb, and you have, like, a way to get high ground. Things like that. So, like, I definitely think there's ways that you could do, like, really cool plays like that. But who knows? At this point, I think it's just a wait and see. We go from there, and then, yeah, so. Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. I don't think passive should be role-based. I think they should be hero-based. And each hero should have a couple to choose from, maybe even more. It depends on the hero. I mean, some could have more, some could have less. I mean, I think that's how it would be. But, yeah. I'm just saying, like, there's ways they could do that, and I think it would add more excitement. I just think the game needs a fresh take on that at times, right? Probably a wild idea, but what do I think about hero variants? Like, say, for example, you can choose between cast that throws hinder or cast that dual wield. That's kind of what I was alluding to, right? You can choose a playstyle. That's why I think, like, I like the idea of that. The problem is that, like, how long does it take to create something like that, right? And if they wanted to do something like that, I don't think it would be something that would happen tomorrow. So, like, what do you do in the meantime? And I think that's the real question. right? Like if you want to do that, sure, but like you want to make sure you get that right. You don't want to do like a bare bones vision of that. You want to release it and make sure it's done right. So what do you do in the meantime? And I think that's what, we'll see some interesting stuff over the next, yeah, we'll see though.